My name is Cyrus Trani. I lead marketing at Concentric AI. I appreciate everyone joining. We're uh, we're looking to do a series of webinars. We're starting this one with kind of some legacy use cases around data governance, data classification, discovery. But we have some hot button issues to discuss. What the market is kind of telling us is Copilot is driving a lot of interest to data governance tools. And we want to keep these series of webinars hot button issues that are top of mind for you folks, and bringing in some of our customers to discuss the issues that they're experiencing, not just on legacy use cases like DLP, like data governance, but also applying that to some of the most innovative tools out there, productivity tools, not just Copilot, but it might be Gemini, any sort of generative AI tools, and how that relates to data governance. Over the course of the webinar, feel free to ask questions in the Q&A. We'll be taking questions at the end. Certainly, if we're not able to get to all the questions, reach out to any rep that you might be working with, reach out to me. I'll put my contact info at the end. So you can reach out, and I'll make sure that we get your questions triaged and answered in a timely manner. We'll also make the recording available to everyone who attends the webinar in case you want to review it and some of the topics discussed. And lastly, if you do feel like you're experiencing similar challenges that we may be able to solve, we'd love to have a conversation. So whether it's questions, whether it's interest, we would love to continue the conversation post this webinar, discussing what your particular fit and how we might be able to help. Certainly, you might already be in discussions with us already. So to start, some introductions. On the panel, we have Todd Morin, who is the IT Security Engineering Manager at Oceaneering. Oceaneering is a Fortune 1000 oil and gas company based in Houston. We also have Zach Lewis, VP of IT and CISO at University of Health Science and Pharmacy, which is kind of a combination of education and healthcare, based out of St. Louis. So I appreciate you both joining. And lastly, we have Karthik Krishnan, who is the CEO of Concentric AI. So to start, thank you. Yeah, guys. So to start, want to start with Zach. Would love for you to just talk a little bit about University of Health Science and Pharmacy, sensitive data relative to your business and your role in data security.
Yeah, so the University of Health Sciences and Pharmacy, we are the third oldest pharmacy school, I think, in the country, if I'm correct in that. So lots of legacy data there. We've been around a long time. We have health information, we have student information, obviously employee information, we have research information. I mean, pretty much touching the gambit there in terms of stuff we're doing. So our research goes into vaccine creation and testing of different, we're trying to create more vaccines and medicines and different types of that. I'm not a pharmacist, so I can't speak to all of that, but I know what's going on over there. And then obviously higher ed's been a high target for threat actors and for the last couple of years because we just have a ton of valuable data with thousands of students. Easy pickings, they think anyway, and so we're trying to secure that and everything else with it.
Great. And so as far as where is this data located, before using Concentric AI and the challenges you were experiencing, but particularly, where is your data located? What were the issues you were having before looking at us? What were the use cases around discovery, classification? I think those are kind of the heart of the issues that you were having.
Yeah, definitely. So I would say probably 3-4 years ago, we moved almost all of our data from on-prem out to Office or Microsoft 365. So SharePoint, OneDrive, took all of our file shares. Users used to have individual, file shares in the environment running on servers. We moved that out to OneDrive. All the large file shares for department were moved to SharePoint, sites created there, and since then that's only grown. So we have OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams, ton of emails, obviously, like everyone else. So some of our challenges there, it's kind of an interesting story in how we got to Concentric. And I've talked about this in other places, but we actually had a data breach scare, or small breach or scare, whatever you want to call it. But when that occurred, threat actors had been telling, we have hundreds of gigs of your data, and it was kind of like, oh wow, where did you get that from? What could it be? And fast forward, to make a long story short, they ended up not having that. We only got, like, I don't know, half a gig, couple gigs, something like that. We were able to shut that down quickly. But during that process, it was, what do they have? Where do they get it from? What's in it? We're trying to like quantify what could be happening in there. Like, even if that data gets posted somewhere, how are we going to even go through it? What are we going to know what they actually have? So after successfully, kind of navigating that situation, the conversation internally turned to, well, how do we have that not happen again? Not so much just also the data breach, but just knowing where everything is. So we started, digging into, how do we classify our data? How do we find out where that PII is, where social security numbers are, where we fall under FERPA regulations, so we have to protect student grades. Where are student grades at? And really getting a handle on that. Who's sharing that to their personal accounts or to people outside the organization? And I mean, our first stop, obviously being a big Microsoft shop, was Microsoft Purview, right? All right, it's there. It's a tool we have. Let's try that. Now, I don't know how many people have ever tried to use Purview or, train it, but training Purview to find things like letter grades, like A and B and files is incredibly difficult. So it wasn't really working for us, and started searching the market for other things, and that's when I got introduced to Concentric. I want to actually say at a cyber conference, I ran into it. They kind of showed me a quick demo of how the platform worked and what it could do, and let's do a POV. We did a POV, and I mean, out of the gate, was able to find grades and classify them the proper way. It was able to help me find research and legal documents, and I didn't have to train anything, which was fantastic. So
Great. Now, as far as the age of your data, was it in PDFs? Is this like, how many years are we going back and you just trying to figure out what it is and then doing the discovery and then classifying it?
yeah, so we probably, I know when we first started looking at data, after our incident, I mean, I was finding files all the way back from 2001, 2002. So you're looking at 20 plus years of data. And that, I don't know if those were the oldest or not, but those files came from the old file shares and migrated out to OneDrive and SharePoint. So we're looking at things that are just ancient, that doesn't need to be kept. And we have data retention policies, and we're really good at keeping data for the length of time that we need to, in the minimum, but then we never get rid of it afterwards. We just save it forever. And so we've actually been using this tool now, Concentric AI, to go in and it's identified, things that are 5 to 7 years old, 7 to 10, and 10 plus, and we're looking at anything like 7 years and older, and we're kind of moving that stuff right now, tagging it, moving it to an archive folder. We're going to see if anyone touches that for the next couple of months, and if not, we're just kind of going to purge it from the environment and let it disappear. So that's a pretty big piece for us as well.
On the topic of the data retention policies, do you do that based on categorization, employee data versus student data? How granular is that? And does the tool give you the granularity that you need when it comes to those policies?
Yeah, so I mean, both. We do it based on regulation of types of data that we have to keep for certain amounts of time, and then we have some of our own internal policies based on the time that we want to keep certain things. And that policy that we have is several pages long, and it goes into detail like course syllabi, course schedules, student records, grades, this, that. I mean, it's very in depth in terms of what we're looking for, and the tool actually has classifiers or categories that almost align directly with a lot of those. So it's pretty easy to scope those retention policies that we have. And then I'll even kind of pivot off from this. And I don't know if we were going to get into it, but data classification in general, like we have a policy, and we had it before Concentric AI was brought on, that it had our data listed and what falls into a restricted, confidential, internal, and public categories. And I was able to take those definitions and give them to you guys, and I guess it was kind of baked in on the back end, and now the tool's able to go in and be like, oh hey, there's there's an HR document. Well, that's got to be confidential based on what's in it. And this has, again, student grades in it. Well, that's a FERPA, regulation thing. They have that marked as restricted, and it's going in and taking those sensitivity labels I have and applying it to those files. And I think you asked about the files. We have, Excels and Word documents. We have PDFs, and even the PDFs are now able to get the sensitivity labels applied to them, and that's pretty cool too. So all your typical Microsoft Office product, file types, I suppose.
Sure. Sure. And as far as the repositories that deployed in across your Microsoft environment, anywhere else within?
All Microsoft environment. Yeah, we don't have anything left on-prem. So SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, Exchange.
So now kind of getting into the Copilot topic, where is UHSP as far as looking at Copilot, concerns that you may have around deploying the product?
Yeah, we have a handful of licenses currently that have been slow rolled out to a few key stakeholders to start testing. I have had other users requesting it, and we've kind of held back on that a little bit as we're just making sure that the controls are in place, and I can't circumvent the labels we have and the restrictions we have, and people can't get to that sensitive data that we don't want them to get access to. We're testing. Microsoft has a lot of good tools in it, and they tell me if I have all the proper, security in place and the proper sharing in place, that everything will work. But kind of you get a little leery. You want to test it and make sure that no one's going to be like, "Hey, Copilot, find me like-minded people with the salaries that I make in this company," and it just all of a sudden pulls all that down or something like that. So, I gotta be real careful with that scoping. But we're very much exploring that right now.
So I know I said that we kind of wait till the end for questions, but there are some questions just for you, Zach, that I wanted to shoot over. Did you create the sensitivity labels prior to implementing our tool?
So in Microsoft, I think I had 3 or 4 sensitivity labels in Microsoft that I was trying to use with Purview. Now, when we brought Concentric in, we left those there because I was using them for the Purview stuff and trying to report there. But we actually created the sensitivity labels based on my data classification policy of restricted, confidential, internal, and public. And once those were created and published out to everyone, the Concentric AI tool is able to go in and take those labels, those 4 specifically, and start applying them to documents. So it I was like, yeah, I don't have any labels on anything that I'm overly concerned about right now. I want to get those 4 on everything. So it's gone through, and I think it's done 4 or 5 million files now.
And another question, and this is related to Purview. For your Azure license, are you on an E3 or an E5 license?
Being education, we're on A's. A lot of our campus has A3, but we do have quite a few A5s too. So there's kind of a split in there, but we do have several of both.
Got it.
Yeah, but to answer the question, so just to interject, you need an E3 license just to be able to apply the labels. You don't need an E5 license to use the MIP SDK to be able to either ingest the labels from Purview or to be able to write the metadata to the files themselves.
There we go. Our students are on the A3s. For education, those are free licenses for students. So we're writing to their stuff as well, and without an issue.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. In fact, you can even actually make do with E1s as long as you have a couple of E3 licenses applied to the admin so that you can use that to basically be able to write the metadata. So we have some customers who are like, oh, I'm on E1s. I don't even have an E3. And you're like, yeah, if you have one E3, then you can actually use that to be able to write to the metadata themselves. So
yes.
Awesome. So Todd, if we could, moving over to Todd and Todd's use cases. Thank you, Zach.
Yeah.
Feel free to chime in as we move forward. So Todd, would love you to just talk a little bit about Oceaneering. I mentioned that you're in the oil and gas industry, very large enterprise organization, and certainly talk a little bit about your role relative to data security.
As far as my role, focused on governance compliance. Under our CISO, we kind of divide up between governance, compliance, and then the actual technology. So I've got a parallel manager that takes care of hard technology. I take care of the tools like Concentric for governance, compliance perspective.
Right. And as far as where your data is located,
Yep.
is it on-prem? Is it in the cloud, in SaaS tools?
Oceaneering, we have data in Azure, in Microsoft as well. So kind of a very similar situation. Anything, it's not just oil and gas. We do have government, military information. We do a lot of work with NASA and space systems. And we do a lot of work with specific customers in the entertainment industry.
All it's massive. As far as the status quo, prior to looking at Concentric AI and implementing Concentric AI, what was the landscape of your data security and the status of it?
Well, this is our 60th year in business, and that's something that the marketing team is pushing. So Oceaneering's been around for 60 years. The status quo was whatever it took to get the job done. Very Wild West, very business siloed. You would say shadow IT. Fairly confidently that was existing. Departments would do what they needed, and things would just happen, without full involvement.
As far as one thing was asked before around sensitivity labeling. Did you have classification labeling in place at the time? What were they getting applied to the documents? What was the
Yes. So before Concentric, we being an Azure and M365 type of a customer, we started touching on to Purview. We've got some labels set up for emails, but they're all manual. And so we're at about a similar time frame as Zach, that we're transitioning to those automatic labels, transitioning to being able to have those categories for email and management of that data content.
And as far as the data that you're concerned most about, in particular, CUI data is something we've talked a little bit about.
Yep.
What is CUI data and why is it so important to Oceaneering?
Confidential, unclassified information. Specifically, it's basically they've got 30-something categories of confidential, unclassified information. One of them is ITAR. Some of it's deals with a lot with NASA, with U.S. government. Some of it deals with arms trafficking. Your international encryption standards, those actually fall under the arms trafficking. So it's interesting to see different products that we create, different programs we create have to have international trafficking licenses. So
Sure.
So
sure. And I know
Oceaneering's an arms dealer at that.
Yeah, the really spans across every legal and illicit industry.
But the result is that data has to be explicitly tracked. It has to be explicitly controlled of who has access to it, where is it accessed. We're not allowed to have just a standard Office 365. We actually have to have a government level Azure deployment. So we have two tenants.
As far as just tools you've tried to do that classification with, going to name names like we talked, what have you tried in the past? You mentioned manual classification. Have you tried automated tools, and what were the challenges that you had with those?
We've tried the automated tools. They were not necessarily as accurate. They didn't have that AI component, but it was 5 years ago or so. The tools were excessively expensive. They were focused for on-prem at the time. It did not even have cloud capabilities. So we're kind of restricted by the products on the market at the time until Concentric came along.
So the three kind of main use cases you've mentioned in the past: DLP, compliance with CUI, and risk management. Starting with DLP, how do we fit? How do we integrate with the enforcement part of what you're doing? Whether if you're using a Microsoft or DLP checkpoint, what are you using, and how do we integrate with that?
For DLP, we've got some targeted programs. For the concentric aspects of it, we're using it to restrict our sharing. So in SharePoint, it's made for sharing. So you can share this data to my Yahoo account. I'm going to work on this later. I'm going to share this data to, it's a grocery list. I'm going to share it to my wife so she can pick up stuff. But what that does is it creates holes. So we were able to use Concentric to control those holes. We do have to share to business addresses, but then we use Concentric to block Gmail, Yahoo, personal email addresses. The free and public emails are a whole category list that we block using Concentric.
Are you sending notifications out when
Yes.
things are okay to the user, to their manager? How's that?
Directly to the user. If there's multiple incidents, then we start informing management and HR.
Got it. And then you talked a little bit about CUI data. Were there challenges in the discovery of that CUI data, and what was different about Concentric that allowed it to discover it? Is it the AI, the context?
Yes, definitely the context. The good news is much of that data was tagged by default. You know, when we started doing government business, 2012, 2015, they started having controls, and it's government business. So there are tags that exist on the document. We were able to put in custom filters, custom context of those tags into Concentric to track our data. Having multiple tenants, having a great employee retention. We have users that go from one department to a different department. They go into government, they go out of government, and they move their data with them. So we've used Concentric to find the government data that is migrated casually to the non-government status. So we're able to pull that out and keep it properly managed.
And I think one thing that's common between your use case and Zach's is we're not just talking about PI and PHI. We're talking about other, I think you referenced high risk license content, just high risk content that's just not only personal health information. There's so much other information that Oceaneering cares about that matters.
Exactly. Drawings, plans, intellectual property. There's a lot of intellectual property that comes out of Oceaneering, because we are, our motto is solve the unsolvable. Large oil and gas company would come to us, hey, we've got this problem, and then we have to go engineer explicit deep sea designs and mechanisms to meet their needs.
Massive challenges, no doubt. And so the risk management aspect of that high risk content, it just from a high level, we're just de-risking through the classification, the DLP aspect of it.
Correct. Your GitHub actions, your GitHub content that gets shared. Sometimes they share it with a customer. Sometimes the customer says, "Oh yeah, I'm not in the office. Just send it to my personal email." Well, we're violating those contracts by sharing with personal email, by having improper share conditions on those. So that's where Concentric helps us find that and keep those corrected.
Right. And as far as going back to kind of the hot topic, Copilot, my understanding, you haven't entertained it too much. What discussions, if any, have really happened at Oceaneering?
We're trying to find some use cases for it. So we've got some products where we're looking to target internal data and do an internal targeted AI ingestion, but it's not yet kind of been structuralized. So we're not sure yet, but we do have a good control of Copilot, so it's not running rogue. That helps in our environment.
Definitely. So going to a couple questions, when it comes to DLP, are you using other DLP tools or is it just Concentric?
We do have a different DLP tool, and that is an agent on each workstation that tracks content. Whether you're attaching a document to an email, whether you're looking at file uploads through web browsers, file downloads through browsers, whether it's in FTP, SFTP, whether you're trying to transfer files, it keeps track of that data movement at a workstation agent level. So it's a lot different use case.
Yeah, the complement, it's just for clarity, we're an agentless tool, so
Yes.
a complementary tool to what we have.
Correct.
I have a question for both Todd and Zach. One of the things we see, at least when talking to a lot of customers, especially around data security, is just how much of a heavy lift solutions are post-deployment into operationalizing things, extracting value and stuff. Can you talk a little bit about just your expectations or your experiences on the post-deployment side in terms of operationalizing tools? More generically, just challenges that challenges that you were mindful of going in, and sort of how you think about working through that. So you're bridging that last mile, right? Which is, hey, I have got to fix this, and I've got to go work with the business units, or I've got to work with the end users, or I've got to go remediate these things, and I have to do this in a manner in which I'm not going to have a lot of support calls. So maybe start with Zach.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, I'll start with the pre-setup, which is when we originally got the tool and set up for POV. For that, just setting the standard there, it took about 5 minutes to get everything plugged in. It kicked off, and it was super easy. And then the scanning kicked off, and it scanned over the next couple of weeks all of our files. From that point, I have I think a bi-weekly cadence with someone at Concentric, and they practically can hold my hand through it. They're there to answer all my questions. So if I'm like, hey, I want to move all these files that are 7 years and older to a different archive folder, can you guys help me with that? And they're like, absolutely, we'll have that done, and we'll have this done and this done by our next call. And it just happens, which is great because I don't have a huge security team. So having that extra support there, that almost like a quarter FTE that I can rely on to pretty much just run this tool for me on the back end is super helpful. If I have questions like, hey, show me how to, show me where all the socials are, or create a query so I can see this or whatever, they're really good about, giving that to me and showing me how to do it. And that's been great. We're doing even the sensitivity level piece, like when creating it and if I wanted to create the 4 sensitivity labels I have in Microsoft and then have them come into Concentric, they were like, here's how you go into your, Microsoft tenant, create these here, publish them here. You might want to let your users know that, they're going to see a date modified on their files because these are going to show up. And it's like, oh, okay, well, do you have any templates for that? Yeah, we have templates for that communication too. And I mean, you guys have kind of thought through every phase of that approach and give me the tools and the templates and the things I need to let my users know what's going on and make it successful for the whole organization, really.
Yes.
Todd?
Quite a few. I mean, we've been a long time user of Concentric. I wouldn't say early adopter, but yeah, definitely an early customer. And it's been great working with the team to actually create features. We would have some operational need, and the Concentric team would actually build that functionality into the platform. Hey, we didn't think about that. Well, okay, but this is a great operation. So operationally, we've run a continuous security on actions, whether it's shares or content or tagging. We've got similar layers of implementation for continuous security of that file content.
Are there any other questions for the guys right now? Otherwise, we'll move to kind of what we're seeing in Copilot and other generative AI tools and your part.
Yeah, sounds good. So you want to?
Sure. Yeah. So just as far as, we've been talking to customers and prospects really in various industries. It is driving a ton of interest and concerns in implementing a data governance tool like ours. Certainly, a lot of our competitors are zeroing in on this as well. But just taking a step back, what is the landscape of these generative AI tools that you're seeing, and the level of adoption and interest?
Yeah, so let's talk about why generative AI tools are becoming such a rage, right? I think for the most part, data models have existed for almost 2 decades now. And what's different about this is Gen AI models can usually work without a lot of labeling and without a lot of supervised data. So if you look at, for example, what Tesla does with full self-driving, that's just a lot of deep learning models that are learning from driving data, right? And that data is not just labeled data. That's just data out in the wild that is basically figuring out deterministic patterns out of. So the first differentiation is it can work without a lot of supervision, which is pretty exciting. I mean, back to what Zach was saying, imagine having trainable classifiers and requiring to provide like good and bad data and stuff, right? It defeats the purpose of what you're trying to do from a data model standpoint. The other thing, second thing is they actually get better with data. The more data you throw at them, the better they get. And the third thing is they can actually create new content because they can look at data distribution. They can actually create new content, not relevant to what we do, but for example, that's how you can create a new Taylor Swift song because you have the entire history of how the pattern of sort of how she creates music, right? And that's why Gen AI tools are tremendously powerful because they can make sense of a lot of your data. Now, it's the same principles that we actually use for our own data governance, right? So we're actually using Gen AI to understand context. We're basically using language models and deep learning to be able to give, for example, Todd and Zach views into legal data and contracts and so on. Now, the flip side of it is if you're deploying it, for example, if you're deploying Microsoft Copilot, Copilot is basically going to traverse your entire universe of data and it's going to make sense of it and it's going to basically produce its output off of that, right? And there are essentially 4 key concerns that a lot of customers have. First of all, if data is not classified going in, if your inputs are not classified, Copilot is going to assume that it's okay for public consumption. For example, I was talking to a CISO of a company. They had 30,000 Copilot installations rolled out. And they had a reduction in workforce conversation going on. And somebody said, hey, should we record this? And he said, no, we shouldn't, because Copilot might end up picking it up if you don't have the right sets of classification of that data. Tomorrow, before some employee could have a link and he or she could access it, now you can just query Copilot and say, hey, are we going to reduce our workforce? And that information is going to become fodder for Copilot to essentially produce its output. And so whatever you do, like classification, permissions, for example, if the input is okay for everybody to access, the output sorts are it's essentially going to inherit the same classification and permission for the input for its output. The third thing, Copilot has really no knowledge of business context, right? It doesn't know that this is financial data that should be protected. This is intellectual property that is sacred. It's going to assume that whatever information is available for it to access is going to be okay for all of your employees to essentially also get access to. And the last thing is Copilot output is by default not classified. And so if you look at the spectrum, now essentially information that could be sitting in the ethers within your environment, all it requires is for, if your salesperson is going to let his or her head know, hey, this deal slipped through this quarter, whatever, now you could have an employee query Copilot and say, hey, how are we doing financially this quarter? And it could be like, oh, we may not be doing so well because this deal slipped, right? And so you're going to have information that potentially you don't want to end up in the hands of your employees. Essentially now, at the tip of a finger, it is publicly accessible. And so data governance almost becomes an essential prerequisite for an effective Copilot rollout. For example, we had a hedge fund where in 10 days, start to finish, right? We closed the deal and it was all up because of a Copilot concern. They were having a Copilot rollout, super concerned about the data breach that was going to come out of it. And so they wanted to make sure they had a classification and an access control management framework in place before you actually did a Copilot rollout, because that vastly reduces your risk surface, it minimizes the issues that you're going to have. Almost every one of our customers is considering a Copilot rollout of some sort. It can range from a limited pilot, 100, 200 users, to looking at a full-scale rollout. And a lot of it is sort of a productivity mandate that's coming in to say that this can help with the productivity for our own employees. And consequently, there's, of course, a lot of security concerns around just, what data is it going to end up using for its input, and also what happens to Copilot output. And if you look at Copilot output, that's not looking at PII, PCI information. That's actually looking at business context and understanding, okay, is it spewing out financial data that should be protected, or is it providing rather benign information that is okay for my employees to get access to?
What security controls does Microsoft have built into Copilot already, and what are the gaps that we really fill there?
Yeah, so Microsoft basically has Purview, and so it's the classifiers that they have, and it's the mechanisms that they have to essentially classify the data. But fundamentally, they are orthogonal, right? They're countervailing forces, because Copilot's mission is to make information accessible by all of your employees who are making sense of it, which is counter to any security mission that you might have. And so for the most part, whatever you get with Purview is essentially what you get as security for a Copilot rollout.
Got it. And now,
There was a question. There was one question that came up about data classification is very broad. Are federal and regulatory AI related reports automated? So the answer is yes. We have a compliance dashboard where we map, in fact, we do something that's pretty unique. We map a lot of the controls related to data security as it relates to things like SOX or HIPAA or NIST or high trust. And we take all the rules in, we map the security controls that are specifically applicable to data security, and we're able to provide a status in terms of sort of where the enterprise environment's at, and help both track progress, help fix issues, so you can satisfy those regulatory requirements, and then produce the reports as well to be able to satisfy that for your specific compliance requirements. And this is something that is pretty unique, because data security has generally lacked that framework. I mean, it's mostly you're going and manually mapping it yourself, trying to figure out, okay, does this have a data security component to it? We've done all the heavy lifting for you in terms of both being able to map it, being able to track it, and then being able to report out of it as well.
and so on those compliance dashboards, can you talk about the granularity? Because I think that's important. Is you see transparency, it's not just a 0 to 100%, is you'll see the exact criteria and controls, and then even within those controls, you can get down to the data level or the file level to see what is in compliance or not.
That is correct. So, for example, it's not just a binary, have you classified, have you not classified, right? Or have you managed access control permissions around it? You can identify specific data sets and say, hey, your finance data is 100% in control, because we've got the right sets of permissions managed around it, and our classification set in place. It could be that there's other forms of intellectual property where the coverage is not quite up to par, and so you can actually have a very granular way to track it. So you can also pinpoint the specific situations where there may be an issue, so you can go focus on that, focus on remediating it, so you can get to 100%.
Mohammed asked a pretty standard question that we hear a lot around running discovery. So once we've done the initial scan, how long does it take? And what's our pace of scanning, and then kind of the type of scan? Could you talk a little bit about that, the contextual scan, and then also ongoing, how frequently should those scans be run and monitored?
Yeah, so the way the system works is the system starts producing insights right away, meaning as we scan data, we're creating category clusters and stuff. We're essentially doing permissions, assignment, understanding, risk monitoring. We're starting to provide insights right away. So it's not like it's waiting for all of your data to be scanned before the insights are produced. In terms of just scan rates, I mean, we have customers today in petabytes where we have fully deployed in a few months. And so we have probably the fastest scan rates in the industry to basically be able to ingest, produce insights, and deliver value. With regards to sort of ongoing management, the way it works is it's a continuous monitoring solution. So as new data gets created, modified, duplicated, moved, etc., the system is sort of monitoring where the changes are all being tracked, and new data as it comes on board is scanned on an ongoing basis. And that's something that we do for customers in real time, depending upon their appetite to consume risk alerts and so on.
And do those scans differ between structured and unstructured data? So I think, one of our important differentiators is that it's really data anywhere. So we're not just focused on structured, which is our bread and butter, but we also do structured data as well.
Yeah, I don't think that changes fundamentally. It's the same thing. I mean, ultimately, the needs for anybody is the same thing, right? You want to identify all the sensitive data. You want to make sure that the right sets of protections are in place, whether it's classification, whether it's permissions management, and then make sure that data doesn't end up in the wrong hands. And so the scan, the ingest, and the ongoing process is the same, whether it's structured or unstructured. It's also the same whether it's on premises or in the cloud.
I think one thing that is interesting, what percentage of our customers still have on-prem data that we're scanning?
95%.
Yeah.
Quite. I mean, even the most, Zach, you're probably you're probably in the frontiers of being a pioneer, right? But for most customers, even the ones that have aggressively migrated data to the cloud, there's a healthy amount of data that continues to be on premises. And that could be structured, that could be like SQL servers, that could be on premises, Windows file systems. We rarely run into a customer who is like 100% in the cloud. And, even the most aggressive ones we know will generally have 60, 70% of the data maybe in the cloud and 20, 30% of the data on premises. And our deployments are 100% for all these customers, our deployments will include both, right? Meaning a single pane that gives them a window into both their on-premises as well as cloud data.
And just as far as how we scope that on-prem data versus cloud data, we're not a user-based pricing model. We look at how much data we have because we run on GPUs. How does that work? Can you kind of demystify how the simplification and simplify our pricing model?
Yeah, we essentially we license on the amount of data we monitor. So we don't care where that data sits. It could be structured, unstructured. It's licensed on the amount of data. Like if it's 500 terabytes of data, we're essentially licensing it. You can move that data between repositories. It doesn't matter. There's no modules additionally for extra data repositories. It's just a subscription license based off of the amount of data that we're actually monitoring.
And before we get obviously to that we welcome doing proof of values. And so I'd like to just touch back with Todd and Zach on how the proof of values went, how easy it was to deploy. So Zach, you talked a little bit about it, but if you just want to just briefly touch on how that process went, get it up and running, and the value that you saw just from the proof of value.
Yeah, like I said earlier, I mean, I think it was about 5 minutes to plug it into Microsoft's environment, and scanning kicked off immediately, and you pick your data sources, what you want to look for, and then it just goes. And as that data starts to roll in, you can start seeing things very quickly. I think it took 2 or 3 weeks for our entire environment to be scanned, but you could see that data coming in while that was happening, and once it was finished, we got on a call and just kind of scoped through it. So very low effort, very low investment of effort to get it up and running, and you can see value, I mean, very quickly. Not much else to add.
Absolutely, same experience. Within within 48 hours, we were seeing viable results. It wasn't everything, of course, because it takes with, 45 terabytes of data in a cloud scanning, it was finished within 3 to 4 weeks. We were finished. So I think that answers one of the speed questions. And it's just been a great experience with a very quick return on investment.
Todd, so you've worked with us a while. Over the years, you've expanded deployment. Where did you start as far as the repository goes, and how has that expanded into other parts of your environment?
We were contemplating the on-prem, but our deployments are global. It just didn't quite meet. Not that Concentric didn't meet it. It's our budget and our project timelines didn't quite meet out. So we're not doing an on-prem type of a solution with Concentric right now. Should we? Probably, but it's not a priority for us right now, because we do have that move it to cloud type of a scenario. But I lost track. I lost track of the question.
Yeah. Is it OneDrive, SharePoint? Where do we start?
Yeah. It was exactly basically OneDrive and SharePoint. We do have multiple tenants, the government tenant and the corporate tenant. So we're able to combine that into one dashboard. The metadata itself is not necessarily in Concentric. Yes, there's a path, but the data content itself is not in Concentric. So that meets our government requirements of not excessively sharing data.
Karthik, and that's certainly a concern that everyone has around, what data are we storing? What are we not storing? Could you talk a little bit about
I'll address that.
Actually use?
Yeah, I'll address that as a multiple question. There's actually a question that came through as well about data residency, right? So we don't store data. We don't store raw data. The only thing we keep is metadata. So we're essentially keeping, because we do language model-based understanding, we create a genetic understanding or a genetic fingerprint that it isn't the raw data. It's more sort of our representation of the information, and we keep things like metadata. With regards to just residency itself, first of all, we have a UK customer for whom, we're standing up a UK data center requirement. So that data never leaves the various environments. But in addition, the raw data never comes to us. And we have deployment modes where the raw data doesn't have to leave your environment. So we can actually, we can pretty much, so all we're keeping is essentially the metadata within a system. So there's no proprietary information related to a customer that we're actually keeping within our own data environment.
Okay. Any other questions that feel free to submit through the chat, Karthik? Do you have any other questions for the panelists?
So Todd and Zach, as you're thinking about data security and sort of, what are some of the challenges that you see over the next 12 to 24 to 36 months as you look out the horizon in terms of technologies that your organizations are looking at, and or challenges that you see that potentially you'll have to tackle as a pressing priority? Maybe start with Todd.
Sure. One of the challenges we have is creative users. So users, they want to do something, they think they can do it, they try to do it, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But that user creativity. So we have to predict what they're going to do, how are they going to share data, how are they going to move data. Even some of our business units where they need to engage a customer in a certain way, how are we going to meet those needs? How are we going to manage that auditing and tracking? So user creativity is a challenge for us sometimes.
I'll echo user creativity and give it my title, which is academic freedom for people who want to do what they kind of want to do. So we're looking at data deduplication. We're finding with the tool that we have a lot of duplicate data out there, and it looks like just several forms and documents uploaded to several different places at one time. That's kind of expanding that data, so trying to get arms around that. We just instituted a couple, policies in there that, keep sharing of SharePoint sites and folders to personal domains, so like your Gmails and your Hotmails and stuff. We were finding faculty and others who had shared, full sites to their Gmail accounts, and maybe they were here and maybe they weren't here anymore, but they still had that access and no one knew. So, really getting controls around that and making sure we know where that data is going and who has access to it, and that the important critical stuff is staying, here central, and others don't have access to it. So that's our main focus right now.
So on the data management and remediation capabilities, we haven't talked too much about that. Karthik, as far as data duplication, deletion, moving files across folders, could you talk a little bit about that, Karthik, on the remediation capabilities? Because that's something that is critical to what we do.
Yeah, I think, as you start, one of the things that is becoming an increasingly important use case for a lot of customers is just data management. I mean, there's a lot of stale, redundant data sitting in primary storage that presents two challenges. One, it's taking up a lot of cost because there's no reason why you need to have, contracts that are 6 years old sitting in primary storage when that stuff can be backed up, archived, at a much lower cost. And secondly, it's just an unnecessary risk surface, right? You've got all this data back to, the points about academic freedom and creative users. You don't know what all these users are going to do in terms of just, moving, creating, modifying, duplicating, unnecessarily creating a risk surface. And so because we can get windows through solutions like ours into, redundant data, into, hey, here's 30 versions of a contract. And why do you have to have 30 versions of a redline contract all sitting in primary storage? You could move a lot of the older versions of it that users haven't accessed to secondary and so on. And so you can actually back it up. And it's really part of that remediation option list that we provide our customers, right? Classification is a remediation option. You can do permissions management, back to what Todd was talking about in terms of, disabling Gmail and Yahoo and stuff like that. And so you can do that actually without classification, and moving files, deleting files, archiving them, migrating them is part of that remediation menu list, if you will, that we provide our customers, so that you can take action, the action that you care about against the specific sets of data sets. And you can do it centrally without necessarily having to rely on your end users or having to go bug them, or go back to your business units and ask them to take action, right? Especially for critical data sets that you care about, you may want to take action right away.
We got a really good question through chat just around user behavior. So since implementing Concentric, Zach, Todd, have you noticed an improvement? Is it still a centralized? You guys have to do the enforcement, but do you see any improvement in user awareness?
I think the specific question is, have you seen any improvement in user awareness and understanding around data hygiene around and after deploying Concentric? Are your users behaving a lot better than they did prior to having Concentric, or are you still being forced to just keep wrapping them on the knuckles, I guess, if you will?
Yeah, I like to think, people always say there's not a technical control for end user behavior, but I'm getting as close as I can to one with this, because I don't think mine are improving anyway. So if I can keep things from happening or encourage a behavior in a different direction, that's what we're trying to do, and get them, adopting sensitivity labels, understanding what that means. I'm not sure how many of them have ever opened the classification policy before to really understand what those documents are for, but having that out there, having descriptors with those that they can put on, and then also blocking that negative behavior we don't want to have happen, I guess makes their user behavior better because they can't do it. But yeah, I don't think the awareness has changed too much just yet.
For ours, it's a matter of messaging. The messages that pop up, the templates that you send out, we had to craft those messages that's beyond just, no, you can't do this. Okay, so we put in the policy statements, we put in links to policy, and kind of explain why. So we've had development groups, business units say, hey, I know you're blocking this kind of stuff. How do we get engaged to make this happen properly? So it's for us, it's actually driving that awareness and driving the continuous improvement.
Another question for both of you. Have you encountered any scenarios where Concentric has been used as part of a discovery process for litigation? Has this aided the process? It's a bit of a, I'm hoping neither of you has had litigation to deal with, but the question is, have you had to deal with it for litigation?
Not yet.
Well, you had a similar example because you'd mentioned about the possible threat, the possible loss of data that you had to go find.
Yeah, well, that's what prompted us to get there. Now, hopefully, I don't have another one of those to have to go through. But
no, and we're on the same track with you, Zach. We've not been used for litigation, but it's been used. It's in our incident response plan that, hey, if we have a detected or a ransomware says, hey, we've got your data, great. What makes you think you have our data? And they'll show some snippet of evidence or something. It's in our incident response plan to actually use Concentric in search to find out if that data actually existed, if it's actually found.
So, there's a great example.
Yeah,
topic.
I can answer this, right? I mean, we had a hedge fund, and not a litigation per se. Their legal team needed some questions answered around, who might have dealt, who might have accessed this data, who might have downloaded it, and so on from the past. And we were, at least the CISO told us that he was able to use us to help satisfy some of the questions that were coming from the legal team. Now, whether that was in support of litigation or in support of other needs, that I don't know. But that's one instance that I'm aware of when it was specifically in response to a legal ask.
I think we had another instance where a large financial services firm had found a folder that all the permissions were external. Can you talk a little bit about how that happened and how our managed services team was able to find that folder and then figure out who had downloaded it from a phishing email? Talk a little about how our managed services team helped from an incident response perspective.
Yeah, I think so. And I can't talk specifically about that instance, but generally, right, I mean, I think, one of the things, especially as you go to the cloud, is the notion of a folder breaks down, right? Before on premises, you could have folders and you could try and put some controls around it. Now, you can move that data from one folder to the other, right-click, link share, and somebody halfway around the world has access to information. So we, in that specific instance, what we were able to help that customer with was find out all the different locations where data of that particular type was resident. And that's usually a very, very hard question to answer. And then also find out where there were sort of, permission creep, people getting access to that similar type of data, where in this particular folder, it was fine, but outside of that folder, it was a huge issue. And so our managed services team was able to go in, corral that information for the customer, and then help them define permissions so they could actually fix the permissions across the entire environment. So they don't have to worry about folder-based permissions, right? You're not worried about, hey, I'm going to have a finance folder and it's going to have, tight controls. What if data now, financial data is sitting outside of a finance folder in a completely different location, and now you're completely out of luck. And so that's exactly what we help them with in that case.
Okay. We don't have any other questions. Any last comments, Karthik, as we wrap things up?
No, I just want to thank Todd and Zach very much for sharing their experiences. I know your time is valuable, so really appreciate you coming in and sharing your thoughts. Both of you are at the front lines, protecting some very, very sensitive data. And so we're thankful, grateful for the partnership. We're thankful for you sharing our experiences with us. Do you have contact information just to flash up, Cyrus?
Yeah, certainly, folks, if anyone has additional questions or interests, feel free to reach out to myself or whoever you've already been working with. Certainly can reach out via our contact us form on our website. All of us will make sure that you get answered your questions in a prompt manner. So Cyrus at Concentric AI, or through our website. But I appreciate everyone joining. This was a very great discussion. We didn't want to bore you with very many slides or anything. Wanted to keep this interactive, whether from the Q&A or from our current customers.
And yeah, we're trying to keep these topics relevant and current, and bring industry practitioners who are at the cutting edge of this in front of you. So if there are topics that you would like to see discussed, addressed, please send them our way. We'd be happy to make sure that we're tailoring this to meet your requirements. As Cyrus mentioned, the goal is not to have 100 PowerPoint slides. It's much more interesting for people to share their experiences on topics. And so, and if there's any tweaks to the format that you'd like to see, do let us know as well. But very much looking forward to making sure that we're tailoring this to specific topics of interest that you might have.
Thank you everyone for joining.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you, everyone. Todd, Zach, have a good rest of the day. All the attendees, thank you very much, and have a good rest of the day. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Guys.